Well, we'd like to welcome everyone to NCG Studios, Texas. It's good to be here today, always is. Solo today. Stephen had to work. My wife, problem came up. It's called grandkids. It's a good problem to have, but she got grandma duty call today, so here I am by myself. But fortunately, we have a very special guest today, and at this time, without any further hesitation, I would like to introduce a dear friend of mine, colleague, someone we all know fondly as Dr. Michael W. Jones. Are you there, Dr. Jones?
I am, Daryl. How are we doing this morning, or this afternoon, rather?
Seems like morning, but we're doing good, doing good. Just looking forward to spending some time with you. It's something that, much as I'd like to, we don't get to do most certainly as often as I'd like to.
I agree. I think spending time, together really gives, the conversation a little bit more traction. And it's been fun over the years being able to walk down the road with you, that is, on this journey.
I couldn't agree more. It's been a major highlight for the past how many ever years. We won't say how many. It's been a few, all of them good.
People could just count the gray hairs and figure it out. It's easy math.
That's right. I remember you had real dark hair when we first got together, and mine was, I don't remember, some other color. It wasn't this color.
I think mine was blue.
Blue? Yeah. Oh, I remember that. Well, I did want to tell you, I very much enjoyed the teaching this morning. I guess maybe I'm different in this area, but some people, I've heard complaints over the years about redundancy. They'll say, well, he teaches on the same things over and over. And I never get tired of it. I guess maybe it's kind of like, it reminds me of, your relationship with someone that you enjoy being with. You just don't get tired of being with them. We say hello every time we see each other. Every time I leave my wife, I say, I love you. And she doesn't ever seem to get tired of that. And when it comes to what you're teaching about God, the things that I'm hearing are things we should never get tired of, and especially what you were dealing with this morning, because this is where I think maybe a lot of people don't get it. I hear preachers all the time talking about forgiveness and how God will forgive you if you'll do X, Y, and Z, and He's such a wonderful, loving God as long as you treat Him right, as long as you say the right things, do the right things, whatever, and if we're good enough, maybe He won't burn us. At the very least, maybe we'll get to at least make heaven. But what I heard you saying this morning, and to me it's pretty apparent, it has to be this way, which is wonderful, and that is that He never held anything against us in the first place. He doesn't even have to forgive, because He's not like us in the sense that He gets His feelings hurt, He gets upset, He gets angry, which is totally contrary to what most teach, what most believe.
The thing that changed my mind years ago, more than anything, I think, is simply being willing to look at things over and over again. And it wasn't my first time through the Greek and the Hebrew text. It wasn't my second or my third or my fourth or even number 50 or 60. It was after many times cruising through the text that I found that, wow, things are so much different. I was willing to look at the text just over and over again. I'm reminded of my wife's eyes. I love looking at her eyes. They are so intoxicating. And one thing that people need to grasp, there's much value in learning how to be content and learning how to enjoy what is. In other words, when I look at the text, I see something that is. It's undeniable. People ask me for evidence all the time. I keep telling people it's right in front of your eyes. Look at the text. Well, they will say, well, that's not from God. I said, that's a secondary argument. The point is, you have a text in front of you. If you will simply look at the text, I want you to look at it, examine it, and actually wrap your mind around what it's saying and tell me, just tell me, please tell me that it doesn't have an impact in your life. Because when you start looking at this text, it's not like just an ordinary text. It is wonderful. In other words, I think that Paul the Apostle was certainly telling us to look at all of the writings. But some of the writings are much better than others. And when I look at the Bible, I see that some writings are pitiful. And then I look at other writings that are priceless. And so we do have some masterpieces to look at. And for people to say, wow, let's not look at these masterpieces, they don't have a good eye. And once you find a masterpiece, you want to look at it and look at it critically. And these things are not about things that don't matter. These things are about how we get along in life. In other words, how am I going to treat myself? What am I to think of myself? And then, when things started changing in my life, I started exploring, not to try to find something different, but I found that God, let me rephrase that. It's better to say that the text was saying something concerning God that was so much richer than what I had ever thought of. And so it stimulated me to think above the way that I was thinking currently. And it, in a sense, it rescued me out of religion. And so it's a strange story. The very book that condemned me actually freed me.
That's amazing. But it makes sense to me because, I can see exactly what you're talking about. There's a couple of things that I have in mind here that I would like for you to address. One of the things, well, actually, both of them really, you could say, are in direct reference to me and my position, because when I look at myself and you were just referring to looking at yourself, and I think this is what every individual really needs to do. But when I see myself, I see just an average, I was raised pretty much in church, got out for a little while, but then felt a need at one point in my life when things weren't going so well. I better get back in. I better get, quote, right with God and see if I can get things on the right track. I felt like I did, but over the next several years, the success rate wasn't that great. Things just didn't add up in the long run without going into any detail. But I consider myself as just an average person trying to find the right way to go. And it's easy to see that it's in Christ that, he had so much to bring to the table. But as I have been able to see exactly what he brings to the table, other than what so many think he does, instead of, just to put it in blunt terms, instead of having come to satisfy a maniacal father, one who is holding all kinds of things against us, and if we don't have someone to come bail us out, so to speak, by shedding his blood, then we've got an eternity of hell to look forward to. And instead of that, I find that we have actually a God who has loved us all along. We never were in jeopardy. And actually what Jesus brings to the table is the reality of that, the fact that all he has for us is love. And our problem is we haven't, not only have we not seen that, but we haven't known how to love one another. We haven't really known what love is. And this thing, and this is the other thing that I want to bring up, the fact that how long it takes for that is to, how long it seems to take for that to sink in. And what I'd like for you to do is give me kind of a proportion comparison, I don't know how to say it, between trying to get this message to someone such as me, I'll use myself as an example, who has been steeped in modern day Christendom, in comparison to someone, say, like an atheist, who never really bought into all of the stuff that someone like me has.
Well, I think that you're talking about an issue of detoxing. I can't say that I didn't have to go through detox, and I can't say that I'm not still going through that. The damage or the level of intoxication that theology in general gives a person is extremely harmful, deadly. It will kill you. It will kill everything about your mind. It will kill all of the things that you really know to be moral. For instance, when you read the Old Testament and believe it, you're going to think that it's all right to do certain things. And it's tragic that people can't really just look at this and say, wow, that can't be reasonable. But it's not true, because when you are in quote unquote the church, you've bought into the farm, so to speak, and you've bought into this meta language that really is, in a sense, it becomes your God, and you worship the text. And I'm talking about not something that the writers actually authored, but you're worshiping a concept that had been conjured up by churchmen. And they wanted us to feel guilty and full of shame. They wanted us to feel as if we needed to be saved. And they knew that they could control us if they could keep us in fear. And so I don't think that it has anything at all to do with that is getting free. I don't think it's so much an educational thing. For instance, if a person has an IQ of 85 and another person has an IQ of 150, I don't think that it's going to be more complex for one or the other. I think it's about the same. And I think that for an atheist just has less baggage to let go of. That is to, as in your words, to get this message. This message isn't, and I want to make this clear, the message is we don't need to believe. There's nothing about believing that makes sense. And let me frame that better. In other words, people ask me all the time, what do you believe? And I said, that's really superfluous to our discussion, possibly, because in time, ask me 10 years from now, my mind is going to react to evidence possibly differently. My mind is going to change, and that's the way that life is. And we don't need to get fixed in belief. What we need to do is we need to allow the mind to be honest. And my believing is simply a reaction. It's not something that I should focus on. It shouldn't be, oh, what do you believe? Oh, what do you believe? It shouldn't be about that at all. Because what I perceive to be true today may change. And it's subject to change as the facts are looked at. And this is why I love redundancy. It's not that I use redundancy so I can just say the same old thing. I love what I'm looking at. When I go to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4, I wish that I could go through that verse and spend 6 months there, because I don't think that people really appreciate what the Apostle Paul was actually trying to say there. And I think that if we start not just, ingesting it, but start digesting it, it makes sense. And there's nothing like, that the factor of looking at it and looking at it and looking at it. It reminds me of a guitar player. The more that you practice, the more that you enjoy the instrument. And once you start learning to read and you start thinking through these various stories, these ideas, they become powerful. And we need to rethink them and rethink them and rethink them and compare them to various other things in our lives. And it helps us to move us forward. And you can see that in some passages of what's called Scripture, they seem to retard us. They tend to send us backwards. And that's why we need to have the integrity to say no to them or reject them openly. And so I can openly reject book after book after book throughout the Bible. I'm not sold on the Bible. In fact, I hate the Bible. I hate the Bible because it's deception. It's a group of men, the canon makers, who wanted to force all the writers into saying basically the same thing, somehow harmonizing an idea about God. And I think that's very, very disingenuous. And the best thing that we could do is to take our Bibles and rip them apart and start reading them in their true context. Note, they were never, 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 never given as a Bible. They were given to people in fragments, just casual conversation sometimes. And it's that kind of setting that means something to all of us. It's not something that's above us. It's not something that's below us, but it's something that really hits true or hits the center of the heart, or true to the heart. And that, that's the thing that I love about redundancy. That's the thing that I love about dealing with the text. It's good.
I'm glad you gave explanation to what you stated about hating the Bible. Gosh, probably not that many years ago, I would have backed off from a statement like that. It would have really made me nervous. But I understand perfectly where you're coming from.
Can I interrupt you for a moment?
Sure.
Okay, because you're making a valuable point. You would have backed away from me making that statement, but we spent enough time looking at something and we could appreciate it for what it really is. Bob Graves, he's a linguist, and he's amazing. And he, as a scientist, he looks at things, and he does this over and over and again. And if he can only give that to his students so they can see and hear and taste and feel what he's, able to, it becomes a completely different picture. Go for it. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I thought that I would make that point because that's why you did step forward. It's because we kept looking at something over and over again, and then we said, can we trust it? What is it? We can be honest with it now, can't we? And so it basically, you've got to go through this, in a sense, it's a form of desensitization. In other words, I can deal with it and deal with it and deal with it, and I'm not afraid of it any longer.
Well, that launches us into where I think we've needed to be all along, but like you said, people got together and basically set a trap that so many have fallen into, and it's, let's be frank about it, it's hard to get out of it because you've got everything neatly organized in your mind and someone comes along and begins to disrupt it. And I think what we've wound up with is more superstition than anything else. We're afraid to go against that which we've learned because we feel like that we're going against God himself. But I had an encounter with a person recently that reminded me of something that I heard years ago, and I used to make fun of this statement and think, these people, they're the ones that are crazy. But I brought it up with this individual recently, and he remembered hearing it too. I don't know if you hear it that much anymore, or if it's a thing that was, from years back, but I'd heard the statement made more than once that people advising maybe their children or I don't know who, just anyone, I guess, don't read that Bible too much. It'll make you crazy. And, that was a much better statement than I ever gave it credit for in the past. Because when you try to just read it and just come up with a God that is consistent, one that actually makes sense, you can't do it. Not from Genesis to Revelation. It's impossible. You've got a Jekyll and Hyde at best. And in that sense, I understand exactly where you're coming from when you say you hate the Bible. It confuses people at best, and it makes them crazy at worst.
I can agree with you. Let me brag on you for a few minutes. One of the things that's really impressed me over the years about you is your faithfulness. I wrote something on Facebook the other day. I said that, and I can't remember exactly how I phrased it, but it was something like this. I'm not stuck in faith. I'm not convinced that I need to just be static with my faith, but I'm convinced that I need to be static with my faithfulness. In other words, I'm going to be faithful to my wife, period, with no exception. But my faith, that is, what I perceive to be true about God, it doesn't need to be static. It needs to be something that's willing to go from faith to faith to faith. And the compliment that I want to give you is, it's rather simple, but it's deep. You've been extremely faithful to your wife, and that's awesome. You've been extremely faithful to your children. That's awesome. You've been extremely faithful to the text. That's awesome. But you've been so faithful that you've realized that your faith keeps moving because you can see objectively what's really going on. In other words, I think that you can say with me, if you are faithful at looking at something over and over again, if you're faithful with your children, it means that you will have the ability to say, wow, this needs some correction. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, no doubt. And there's something about this journey that that we're on, and when it comes, I keep looking at this on the chat box over here. This comment from Herbie Del Toro. It's good to see his name. I hope he's watching. If he is, hello, Herbie.
He's a great guy. I mean, Herbie, wow. He's one of those guys that, you have to be impressed with, because he's going to be there whether people give you hell or not. He's the kind that is faithful. Yeah, he has a lot going on. I'm proud of him.
Well, his comment is, thanks, Doc, for teaching us how to mature. And to me, this is something that's one of those areas that I think, to be honest about it, I think Paul struggled with, actually. I mean, we can go all the way back to Paul and look at what he was wrestling with. And there's something that is hard to convey to people, even though, you're experiencing it. It's kind of like you were talking about faithfulness to a wife. People that never have gone there, they're missing something, especially when it's reciprocated. When you have a relationship of faithfulness, there's just nothing that compares. But you can't really convey that to someone other than just to tell them how great it is. And to actually start down the road in the maturing process to get off of this static faith, as you were referring to, and realize that there's so much to learn, so much to gain. and we have so much territory to cover. It's a life quest, and it never disappoints. It just keeps getting better. And so I appreciate your compliment. And I'm not going to argue and say no, it's not true. But there's something about this that I have to say, hey, what else can I do? I mean, it's like eating popcorn or Lay's potato chips or something. You just want more.
But
So,
but the thing that you've done, throughout the years when we have bled, you have been willing to bleed. And what I mean by that, people need to understand that the New Covenant group is not here because it just exists. It exists because people are faithful. That is, they give their very life in order to see other people, to give them the opportunity to move forward. And it takes people like you, and it has been people like you who continue to do what you do day in and day out. You keep looking at something and you keep saying, wow, I want to give this not just to myself, but I want to give this and share this with my wife and my children, my mother, my father, everyone you come in contact with, you want to share this. And we can call it a message, or we can just say it's a way of life.
yeah.
And that's what it is to you and for you, because we spend a lot of time on the phone, and sometimes you tear up because this means so damn much to you. And I just break into tears too, because people don't know what goes on behind the scenes. That is, for those of us who are heavily invested, that is, in doing something for other people, not because we're looking to gain, but simply because we have found that loving and being one who loves and accepts unconditionally, that's our life. And that's why I'm bragging about you. You have been one amazing individual. And so maybe we can have some applause at some point in time concerning you.
Well, that's fine if we do, but like I said, and yeah, I was just thinking about something that you might remember. We're close to the same age, and back when TV was black and white, there was a show, you might remember it. It was called To Tell the Truth.
Yes.
You remember that?
Yes.
And they had three men sitting there, and they would tell their life story, and the panel would have to figure out which one was actually telling the truth and was really that person. And I think at the end of it, they said, will the real whoever please stand up? And they would even, one of them would start to get up, and then he'd sit back down, and finally the real one would stand up. I kind of feel that way at this point about Jesus. Will the real Jesus show himself?
That's true.
Because I'm going to go back to something that I go to fairly often these days, and maybe it's not that good of an analogy, but I like it. Every time you see one of these beauty pageants, and of course I don't watch them, I try not to, at least leave the bathing suit part out, we're not supposed to be looking at that sort of thing. But the reason I bring this up, you've got all these candidates, when they're asked what it is they want from life, what do they want to see happen, they nearly always going to throw in world peace. World peace. That's what they all want. And it sounds so noble. I mean, maybe they really do. Maybe they try out for Miss America so that they can hope for world peace. But when I think about the real Jesus, what he really brings to the table, what Paul seemed to putting so much effort into getting across is that the walls are down. There is no more hostility. This is what we have. This is what we really have. And we've not seen that. We've not seen that in our day. I don't think we've seen that in the 2,000 years since Jesus came in the flesh and since Paul tried to explain what he really was about. And personally, I think that's what we've tapped into. And I think we're seeing the beginnings of it in a way like possibly we've never seen before.
You know, the thing that troubles me is that in theism, most people are looking at who Jesus is, and they're trying to perceive Jesus as doing this work. I keep hearing a phrase over and over again, the finished work of Christ. It's gotten me to the point to where I'm almost sick.
Yep.
Because the implication of that particular theology suggests that he had to do a work. And the thing that I see in Jesus is that he never ceases to amaze us. That is, ceases to do a work. In other words, I can't imagine why anyone would think that, oh, this is the finished product of Christ. Why go there? Why put an end mark on what Christ did? That doesn't make sense. You know, we want to go back into ancient theology and say, wow, you know, he did X, Y, and Z. Most of that was just extreme metaphor, trying to make a point. It seems better for us to say, he got the ball rolling. It wasn't a finished work at all. He actually gave the ball over to us after he got the ball rolling. I like to look at it like that, much better than a finished work. The finished work of Christ doesn't make sense to me. I think it's, I think it really ignores the real Jesus, as you're speaking of, and what it does. It pitches the pretentious Jesus of the church as one who would take care of our sins and, you know, destroy X, Y, and Z. And we really don't understand the terms when we take that route, that is, of theology. But I do think that Jesus is one who said, I can work with you. In fact, I can work with you from the inside. I'm very comfortable with that. And today I'm living and Christ is working, quote unquote, in me just as he is working in you. That's not finished. My kids, they don't need to get the idea, oh, his work is finished. No, it's not finished. He's amazing. He will continue to live and move and have his being in me. And I have many things that need to be wrestled with, and it's legitimate. I'm being very honest with you. It's a wrestling match every day in various issues.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's, you know, when we were talking about the text, I was you know, I've gone from one who, and maybe you were here before, I know we've talked about this, doesn't really matter to me so much anymore, but that believes something about this inerrancy issue. And when I talk about it now, I think, what in the world, or I could even say on this show, I think I can say, what in the hell was I thinking? I mean, which version's inerrant? Is it the King James? Are we talking about any one of the other versions, or do we got to go back to the original language? None of us, well, there's only a handful of us that can do that. So we got a problem to start with. But to go from that point to where I am now, and I talked to you about this earlier, because I know it's easy to use a term, throw out the baby with the bathwater, and you know, to say, well, Paul, you know, your books are in the Bible; they're not worth fooling with. You know, you didn't really have anything to say. I haven't heard you say that. I know we're not saying that. You know, Paul had a lot of things going on in his life. He had a lot of information that we need to look at, and you've already pointed that out on this show just a few minutes ago. 1 Corinthians 13, powerful, life-changing information. But at the same time, you know, when I go back and I read now, but I read it so differently than what I used to. And I can actually, instead of seeing something that I'm have it imagined in my mind that I'm reading the very words of God to me, I mean, that's gone.
Right.
But to look at a man who, in his time, had plenty of struggles, plenty to wrestle with,
Right.
lots of baggage, and he's trying to sort it out and at the same time lead people a new direction. And you can hear the struggle as you read.
Right.
And it's wonderful because so many good things are breaking through. And yet at the same time, you can see he's not just trying to deal with a Jewish mindset, but also a Gentile mindset. And the wall has just been knocked down that had been dividing these groups, and he's trying to make that clear. He had quite a task at hand.
Well, you know, this is difficult to wrestle with. That is what I'm getting ready to say. If we only had 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and let's say verse 4 through 8, a lot of people would say that's all we need. I don't agree with that.
No.
I think that to understand truly what 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4 through 8 actually means to the Apostle Paul, I think it's interesting and necessary, essential, to go back into his history and see where he came from. And so look at his baggage. And this is why, when you look in the Old Testament, you need to look at all that shit. That's where he came out of.
Yep.
And it's the kind of shit that people need to leave. And it's a tragic, tragic, tragic history. But you can see something in all of these stories, not just in the Old Testament. Look at the other writings from other sacred writers. Look at the writings that are not even in the sacred texts all over the world, but you can see that everyone is basically on a journey, and we can look at where we have been, and we can get beyond our quote-unquote shit.
Right.
Hopefully that's the best term here.
Well, Paul used it, from what I understand, when he spoke in reference to the very thing you're talking about.
When he was speaking in English, he did well.
Yeah. But, yeah, you talk about a total transformation, and I've heard you refer to Paul as a terrorist. That's probably the best way to categorize him. He created terror for these new followers of Christ until something or someone got a hold of him and just radically revolutionized his life. And to look at that one element and see where society has gone since then, with all the hindrances that it has had. I mean, with all the problems we have in the world today, when you look at as well as it functions with as much baggage as it's carrying, to me it's pretty amazing. And the question in my mind is, where could it go if people began to promote the very thing that we're trying to promote here?
Right.
And I think a lot of people are catching the vision, if you will. That may not be the best way to put it, but people that are coming our way are serious. They see something valuable here. And it's just people working together. Like I said, I keep saying this, the walls are down. There is no more againstness if we can just realize that.
This is the thing that I like about atheists. They are willing to say, if you have someone on an island who had never seen a sacred text of any kind, they would develop all kinds of morals. They would have something working from within. Even David Silverman, he confessed. He said, I'm making that judgment call, and all of this is coming from within. And I don't think that Jesus was trying to push, you need to say the God term, put the God label on everything. I think that Jesus was more than comfortable simply leaving the whole idea of whatever you think that is, label it however you want to, because This is the way that we are. We need to be honest. If you want to call whatever it is God or not, that's fine. There's no sensible reason to me to always say, well, I'm looking at the same thing that you are, and we have to call it God. We just don't. We can call it something different.
Well, to go back to the text that you were in reference to, that you'd like to spend months, I'd like to do that. Just looking at 1 Corinthians 13 and juxtaposing it up against everything else there is, for that matter. But the interesting thing is, apparently John made the statement that God is love. So it seems to me like Paul could have chosen to say, let me show you God. God is kind. God is all these things. But instead he uses the term love. It's the element that he brings to us, that we share with one another. And it's like, I don't know, to me it's like the way it should be. A person sits down to eat a meal and there's a hungry person beside him. I see you need the same thing I do. Let me share it with you. And that, to me, is the idea behind all this. It's something that we have that enables us to interact and relate to one another in a way that is most powerful. To put it in Paul's English terms, the most excellent way.
I agree with you. We have someone in the back who's jumping up and down in the control room saying we are out of time, actually overtime. And but I will say you have a right to go overtime.
Well, I appreciate that, but I don't want to hold up the other programs. I know we've got some good programming coming, and so I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this and how much I appreciate you and our relationship, and look forward to many more years. We're going to take care of ourselves. We're going to hang around, and we're going to see lots of good things coming our way.
I agree.
That's my prophecy.
You're prophesying. Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Daryl, we love you so much. This is not my show, so I'm not ending it. I'm going to listen to you. But we love you and your wife and your family so much. We can't wait until we see you again. That is face to face.
Absolutely. I'm with you all the way. And I'm asking everyone to stay tuned. We have many more good shows to come. Please be there at 8 o'clock for special guest this evening. From what I understand, Nick Albertini is going to be on. Is that correct?
Nick Albertini, correct.
Albertini, okay.
And also Christian Luca.
Okay. It's going to be great then. And we'll be looking forward to that and the shows between now and then. But for now, we're going to say goodbye here from Texas. We appreciate you being with us. Look forward to next time. Thank you.